Hi everyone, I'm Leanne,
And I'm Mike.
and this is Unschooled History. Welcome to part 2 of our 4-part episode on the history of the Bible. In this episode, we're going to focus on the Dead Sea Scrolls, but in order to understand them, we have to understand the Essenes.
Yeah, they're an interesting bunch of people.
The Essenes were a sect of Judaism. They were a fairly large sect, but not as big as the Pharisees and Sadducees. They were dedicated to poverty, to daily mikvahs or ritual baths, and to asceticism, which is extreme self-denial. They lived a communal life. They didn't make oaths, they didn't sacrifice animals, they were dedicated to being channels of peace. They lived a communal lifestyle, they lived to serve each other. They were basically ancient hippies, with the exception of the free love thing, because the Essenes were split into two groups. One group avoided marriage and sex entirely, and the other group would have engagements that lasted for 3 years and then get married, except for their priests. Both groups practiced priestly celibacy. For the most part, they were scribes. Their priests were priests in the Zadokite tradition, meaning that they were descended from Zadok, the first priest in Solomon's temple. Something else that I think we need to explain is the Sofer.
Yes.
Not the shofar, which is the animal horn, usually a ram's horn, used to blow 100 blasts on Yom Teruah, which is incorporated these days into the Feast of Rosh Hashanah. A Sofer is a special scribe of religious importance.
They do a lot of special copying, and they have to be very specially trained. They have to copy, they can't make one mistake.
No, they really can't. He has to be religiously observant and of good character. And I say he because female Sofers are very, very rare. And until recently, they weren't even really allowed.
No.
He also has to be knowledgeable of the laws concerning sofruit, which is the act of creating the copies. His education consists of years of practice in calligraphy, as well as memorizing the thousands of laws applying to Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzot, and other texts that are on parchment, such as the ketubah or marriage contract. Honey, what is the tefillin?
Those are the boxes that you see observant Jews wear on their um, right I think it's right. It's on their forearm and on their head during special prayers.
And mezuzot. That is the plural of mezuzah, correct?
Yes, which we have on our door.
Yes, we do. Michael is actually Hebrew Catholic. And so we do have a mezuzah on our door, which
On our doorpost.
on our doorpost. And what is the purpose of it again?
Um, it's one of the Lord's commandments that we should put His words on our doorposts and entryways to our homes. And the words were that we shall have no other God but Him.
Awesome.
It's called a Shema.
So all of this apprenticeship is done under an older, more experienced Sofer. And like Mike said, they have to be absolutely accurate in their copying. What happens if they make a mistake? Especially if they're copying a Torah.
We were told and taught at school that they had to destroy the entire thing and begin again. But the passages exhibit said they could actually cut it out and put a patch.
Either way, there is some destruction involved.
Yes.
So that's interesting. And you see a recent Sofer in the picture on the right. There is a list of Sofers on Wikipedia, and one of the reasons that Torah scrolls are so expensive, thousands of dollars, right?
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands of dollars, is that these scrolls are done completely by hand. There's only 3 or 4 living Sofers in the world right now, I think.
I thought the total was 6.
6 living Sofers in the world right now, half of which are women, one of whom was the first female Sofer in modern days. One, the first Canadian, who also was the first to complete a Torah scroll, and one, the first American female Sofer. So it's interesting the sheer amount of work that they have to put in, and it's amazing how dedicated they have to be to what they do.
Yes. As a little note, Sofers only write a couple of lines a day. Is to help them prevent having back problems and arthritis problems because they have to write so intently and concentrate so hard on their work.
Alright, so now we're on to the scrolls themselves. As we mentioned in part 1, the scrolls were found in Qumran in caves in the mid-40s by some Bedouin shepherds, and excavations have since found thousands of scrolls and fragments. This slide shows what is perhaps the most famous of the scrolls, the Great Isaiah Scroll. It's called that because it contains the complete book of Isaiah. You can see, of course, that there are some pieces missing from the parchment. It's the oldest copy of the book of Isaiah that we have. It's also one of the first 7 scrolls that were found. It's written in Hebrew, and it is the most complete of the scrolls. It's the only scroll to be found pretty much in its entirety. In fact, there's only a few words missing. Radiocarbon dating tells us that the Great Isaiah Scroll was written sometime between 353 and 103 BC. And here's where talking about the Sofer comes in, because as mentioned, a Sofer has to be super accurate in his transcription. And they have to be so accurate that the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is more than 2,000 years old, is identical to the modern Masoretic text, which is different from modern Hebrew in that there's no punctuation, accent, or vowel marks in the Masoretic text.
Those are often called jots or tittles, huh?
Yes, jots or tittles. That being said, the text matches the text in the Masoretic text and in the Septuagint as well, from which the Latin Vulgate was translated. There are some differences, but they are very, very minor, such as spelling variants and word order, and they do not affect the meaning of the text at all, which is kind of cool.
Yes.
It just shows how accurate our modern translations are.
Yes.
And it shows how carefully the Sofers were working even back then.
Yes.
So another famous scroll is the Copper Scroll. It's perhaps the most famous, and it's the only one not written on parchment, obviously. Like 60% of the scrolls, the Copper Scroll has nothing to do with Scripture. Instead, it's a list of treasure and directions to the location where various treasures can be found. For example, line 11 in column 2 reads, "In the cistern which is under the wall on the eastern side, at the sharp edge of the rock, 6 silver bars. Its entrance is under the large paving stone." There is debate as to whether or not the Copper Scroll was created by the community at Qumran, however. There is a large range of dates based on paleographical evidence, placement of the scroll when it was found, because it was found at the back of 40 jars of scrolls, as well as the contents of the scroll, because there are suggestions that it was maybe the treasure of the Qumran community, maybe it was the treasure of the first temple. They're not sure.
No.
The estimated date range is huge because it's from 25 to 135 AD. Later dates, anything after 68 AD, would mean that the scroll was created after the Qumran community was destroyed. Which makes you wonder then, okay, how did it get in with the rest of the scrolls?
Most of the later dates are not considered by most scholars.
And this is one that we've seen a copy of. Not the real thing, but we saw a replica when the Passages exhibit came through. And it was really, really cool to see even the replica, because the replica is almost identical to what you see here, and what you see here is the real thing. And I loved looking at it because, and I saw a special.
Yes.
Did you watch it with me, honey?
Yes.
Yeah, we saw a special on the unrolling of the copper scroll. And they had to be so delicate about unrolling it. And even then, they weren't able to unroll it completely in one piece. They had to carefully cut it into sections. Alright, now check this one out. This is the Temple Scroll. While the Isaiah Scroll is the most complete, the Temple Scroll is the longest. It's also unique because of the salt finish that was used on it. None of the other scrolls found at Qumran have this. The scroll is written in the square Herodian script of the Second Temple period, which lasted between 516 and 70 AD.
Mm-hmm.
Presented as a revelation by God to Moses, the scroll describes an idealized temple that was never built. Though not in the same order as the text found in the Bible, the majority of the text is a reworking of Exodus 34 to Deuteronomy 23. There is no consensus as to the date or the author. The rest of the scroll describes holy days, stringent purity laws, and how sacrifices are to be conducted. So we have this big, huge, long scroll, but again, it's not complete. You can see where there's been a lot of damage along the top, and so we're missing a lot of it. We're not sure exactly how much. Because it could have actually been taller than what we see. Not likely. Too much taller, but again, that damage along the top, and it's all the way along the top, we don't know exactly what we're missing from it. This is one of the shorter texts. Honey, guess what it is?
I'm not sure.
It's the Son of God scroll.
Ah.
You want to know what the other name for it is?
What's that?
The Aramaic Apocalypse. Dated to the last third of the 1st century BC, the scroll has 2 columns of text. That's it. Because Semitic languages such as Aramaic and Hebrew, and yes, this includes Arabic and Farsi as well, they're read from right to left. So the right-hand column is in fact column 1. As you can see, it's heavily damaged, while column 2 is more complete. The text from column 2 has parallels to Luke 1, 2 Samuel 7, and Daniel 7. Like Daniel, it is a form of apocalyptic literature, which was a popular literary genre in the ancient world.
Yes.
This is because it allowed for criticism of leadership. Well, it did.
Yes, it did.
I mean, it served kind of the same purpose as the Fool in the medieval and Renaissance period, or satire starting in the Age of Reason.
Yes.
So you have criticism of leadership in the form of prophecy. There is debate on interpretation. Because of the parallels to the Bible, especially to Luke, Some experts believe that the Son of the Most High being referenced to be a messianic figure. However, others believe it to be an evil figure, an earthly king, with the Syrian king Antiochus IV being a strong candidate. Again, possible.
Yes.
Could be possible. We don't know. Experts are split. And again, could be criticizing him.
Hard to tell with all the text present.
He was considered a tyrant. So. And just like the book of Revelation, which was really about Nero. So, could be Jesus. Could be Antiochus. The last of the major scrolls that we are going to talk about, honey.
The War Scroll.
Yes, it is. It is the War Scroll. It is also known as the War Rule or the Rule of War. But the full title for this scroll is, and get ready, it's a long one, The War of the Sons of Light Against the Sons of Darkness. It is a manual for military organization and strategy and is basically the ancient Jewish version of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Which one of those is older, by the way?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. We may have to look that up later.
Maybe.
Because you and I both read Sun Tzu's The Art of War.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sun Tzu had issues.
Yeah.
But he was a brilliant military commander. So we have this, the War Scroll, and much like the Son of God Scroll, it's also an apocalyptic text. It describes, as the title indicates, a war between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness over the course of 2 battles that start 6 years apart from each other. The first one, the Sons of Light, consists of the sons of Levi, Benjamin, Judah, and the exiled of the desert against Edom, Moab, the sons of Ammon, the Amalekites, Philistia, and their allies, the Kittim of Ashur, and those among them who violate the covenant. This battle takes 1 day, 7 stages. That's it. This is followed by a 6-year preparation, which culminates in the full restoration of the temple at Jerusalem before a long 40-year war. This time, the Sons of Light are the united 12 tribes of Israel, and they conquer all of the nations of vanity before an eternity of peace. This all, of course, parallels the book of Revelation, which isn't all that surprising because, as we mentioned earlier, apocalyptic literature was a popular literary genre.
Yes.
It's like how young adult fantasy novels centering on sparkly vampires are popular, apparently, today.
Ew.
Although, apparently not as popular as young adult novels involving dystopia.
Yeah. But the war novel, or not the war novel, the War Scroll, from what I've come to understand of it, is actually what's survived of it. It's very good reading. Well, in translation.
Yes, in translation. And you can read all of the Dead Sea Scrolls in English or whatever your native language happens to be. There are translations of them out there. And it's worth reading.
Yeah.
If you're interested in this sort of thing. It's really cool. Okay, so we've gone over the more famous ones. The Dead Sea Scrolls are approximately... I actually had the wrong numbers earlier. According to the museum in Israel, it's 60% biblical text, not 40%. And then of the other 40%, 25% are sectarian non-biblical and 15% non-sectarian non-biblical, such as the Copper Scroll. Amongst the 60% of the scrolls that are biblical texts, every book of the Old Testament is there in various levels of completeness.
Yeah.
It's cool. And you have all these little fragments.
Mm-hmm.
So we have big scrolls, we have little scrolls, we have little fragments, big fragments, everything in between. And, of course, the only complete scroll we have is the Great Isaiah Scroll. With the exception of the Copper Scroll, they're written on parchment, which is made from animal skin. And just a week before this video's upload, the Jerusalem Post published a new, exciting article on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, yeah, you gotta tell them.
DNA tests have been done on the scrolls.
Yeah.
And y'all are probably wondering, why are we doing DNA tests on a bunch of scrolls? What is that going to tell us? Okay, so here's what it told us. All but 2 are sheepskin. Not a surprise. Sheep are commonly raised in the desert. They're well adapted to a desert environment. But the 2 that aren't, they're made of cow skin.
Yeah.
They're made of cow skin. This is an animal that does not do well in the desert. It wasn't even herded in the desert at all 2,000 years ago. But wait, there's more. The DNA tests were able to show which pieces of parchment came from the same animal, and therefore which fragments belong together, as well as which fragments were likely written around the same time and which were written either later or earlier, because they could show how closely the animals were related to each other. And obviously, a closer relationship between animals that provided the parchment, the more likely those animals were slaughtered around the same time.
And part of the same herd.
And part of the same herd. And don't worry, they were not just slaughtered for their skin. Ancient peoples used everything. They used every part of the animal. One of the texts closely analyzed was the Song of Sabbath Sacrifice, originally found at Masada, which is way down at the south end of the Dead Sea. For years, it's been theorized that after the Qumran community was destroyed in 68 AD, that the survivors fled to Masada, all because of this particular fragment. However, DNA testing showed that the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Sabbath Sacrifice fragment, was made from the skin of a sheep that was not related to any of the sheep that provided skins for the other scrolls. This means that the song was known outside of Qumran, and this fragment may be one of the roots of Western mysticism.
Which is awesome and amazing.
And who knows what we may discover in the future. But for now, if you want to see the real thing, you'll have to go to Jerusalem, to the Shrine of the Book, which is pictured here. This wing of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem was designed to house the Dead Sea Scrolls and was inspired by the War Scroll, with the white dome representing the sons of light and the black wall representing the sons of darkness. The scrolls are too fragile to keep on display continuously, so they're rotated every 6 to 8 months. Still, a visit is absolutely worth it. And if you can't get to Jerusalem and you're in the U.S., they have replicas at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C.
Not of all of them, but of a select few.
Not of all of them, but of a select few. Now, here's the sad part. They found out that some that they thought were originals were actually frauds.
Yeah.
Pretty much anything that was found after 2002 has been found to be a fraud at this point.
Yeah.
So that's sad. But they do have a lot of replicas. It's really cool. Again, we've seen them as part of the Passages exhibit, and even the replicas look great.
Yes.
The whole thing looks awesome.
The Traveling Passages exhibit was a forerunner of the Museum of the Bible and was run by the same people.
Yes. And they were remarkably accurate in their history. It didn't reflect, instead of forcing the story that they were telling to reflect the beliefs of the people running it, because it's the same people who own Hobby Lobby.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of forcing it to reflect their beliefs, they chose to go 100% historically and factually accurate instead. And I love that. When we went through and we saw that they weren't just saying, oh, the King James Bible was the first Bible and everything is based on the King James Bible. No. And believe it or not, I have run into people who think that the King James Bible was miraculously handed down by God in English.
We went through the exhibit several times. We were so impressed with it. They start with teaching you about cuneiform and the history of the writing in the area, and then they
talk about how they talk about the Old Testament. They had a sad, really. I cried when we were in the Holocaust section.
Yeah.
Especially when I saw that the Germans were using pieces of Torah scroll for wallpapers, for lampshades,
shoe
liners. It made me sad. I cried every time I went through that particular section. But the rest of the exhibit was so well done, and I just know that if we ever manage to get out to Washington, D.C. to go to the Museum of the Bible, we're going to have a similarly good experience.
Yes.
Alright, so thanks for watching. Obviously, don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to go to our Facebook page. Link is in the description. And we will see you next week for part 3, when we will be talking about how the canon of the Bible was decided upon.